collapse. Predictable financing, particularly through multilateral mechanisms, is an essential to sustain operations and rebuild livelihoods. Third, addressing conflict-related food insecurity requires coherent political, humanitarian, and development action. United Nations Security Council Resolution 2417 reminds us that the deliberate starvation of civilians is prohibited. Yet, such violations persist. The Council must ensure that Resolution 2417 is translated into consistent practice, demanding respect for humanitarian law, unhindered humanitarian access to all civilians, and holding accountable those who weaponize hunger. In the context of accessibility, I would like to underscore the indispensable role of maritime security in safeguarding global food supply chains. Nearly 90% of traded food commodities move by sea. Disruptions to maritime routes due to conflict directly jeopardize the availability and affordability of food worldwide. Fourth, we must recognize that food security is national security. Where people cannot feed their families, despair fuels displacement, instability, and conflict. When food systems collapse, so do economies, institutions, and social cohesion. Investing in food security is therefore an investment in peace. No nation can be secure when its people are hungry. Mr. President, on this occasion, we reaffirm our steadfast commitment to global food security. Greece is party to the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty since 2024 and was among the early signatories of the 2023 joint communiqué condemning the use of food as a weapon of war. Translating commitment into action, Greece proudly participates in the Grain from Ukraine initiative under WFP. Further, in solidarity with civilians, Greece airdropped 8.5 tons of food supplies in Gaza earlier this year, while also being a contributing donor to WFP's operations in Sudan. The human cost of inaction is measured in lives lost, in children irreversibly malnourished, and in communities robbed of hope. The hunger hotspots and global report on food crisis are not records of despair. They are calls to coordinated, decisive action. Preventing famine and ending the weaponization of hunger are not only moral imperatives, they are political responsibilities. Greece stands ready to work with all partners to ensure that conflict no longer consigns millions to hunger. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. I welcome your participation. Excellency Dr. Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic, and commend Sierra Leone for convening this timely open debate. We also thank the Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina Mohammed, the Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Joyce Msuya, the African Union Special Envoy, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Miyaki, and Mr. Maximo Torero Kulen for their thoughtful briefing. Although the Security Council adopted Resolution 2417 in 2018, resolution which identifies the link between armed conflict and hunger, resolution which condemns the use of starvation as a method of warfare, acute food insecurity continues to escalate. The 2025 Global Report on Food Crisis demonstrates that conflicts remains the primary drivers of the most severe crisis. Nowhere is this starker than in Sudan, than in Gaza. In Gaza and Sudan, siege tactics, restrictions on food, clean water, fuel and electricity, and repeated strikes on essential infrastructures have amounted to the use of starvation as a weapon of war. The impact on civilians, especially children, has been profound, with long-term consequences that cannot be reversed. The link between hunger and conflict feeds a vicious circle, a vicious cycle. Breaking this cycle is essential if the Council is to uphold its responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, allow me to highlight 3 priority areas. First, starvation. Starvation can never be justified as a tool of war. Parties to conflict must protect civilians and the system crucial to their survival, including food production and water infrastructure, and must allow unimpeded humanitarian access to the needy population. Algeria is actively engaged in this agenda, co-chairing the working group on the protection of civilian infrastructure within the global initiative to galvanize political commitment to the international humanitarian law. Our commitment to humanitarian personnel was reaffirmed when we signed 2 months ago the Declaration on their protection in September 2025. Second, sustainable political solutions are indispensable. Many countries confront overlapping pressures from economic shocks, climate extremes, inflation, displacement. Algeria supports socio-economic development as a foundation for stability through its cooperation agency, which finances projects across Africa in partnership with UNICEF and UNDP. Third, President, the Council should advance concrete measures, including creating early warning mechanism for violations against food, energy, and water systems, mobilizing financial resources to rapidly restore essential services in conflict setting, guaranteeing safe, rapid, and unhindering humanitarian access, ensuring accountability for attacks on civilian infrastructure, and finally, establishing a dedicated sanction regime targeting parties that violate Resolution 2417 and commit international humanitarian law breaches such as starvation as a weapon of warfare. Mr. President, food insecurity can arise from many factors, but when it is driven or exacerbated by armed conflict, the international community, the Security Council, has a duty to respond swiftly and decisively. Algeria remains fully committed to working with all partners to protect civilians, to uphold international humanitarian law, and to promote just and lasting peace in the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea commends Sierra Leone for convening this timely debate on the presence of His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada, President of Republic of Sierra Leone. I also thank the Deputy Secretary General Mohamed ASG Musia, Special Envoy Mayaki, and Mr. Torero for their insights. Mr. President, the relationship between conflict and food insecurity is interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Helping communities in need requires integrated and holistic approaches that address both immediate requirements and structural causes. In this regard, the Republic of Korea underscores the following three priorities where the international community must take more decisive action. First, ensuring unimpeded humanitarian access and responding to urgent needs. Time and again, we have seen a disturbing pattern of the deliberate obstruction of aid. Notably, humanitarian access has been used as a weapon of war, aid convoys denied, warehouses looted, and relief workers targeted, leaving millions trapped in certain areas declared by the UN as in famine. Recalling Resolution 2417, my delegation urges all parties to conflict to respect their obligation under international humanitarian law, facilitate rapid and unhindered humanitarian access at scale. At the same time, the Council and the international community must support more active, responsive approaches, including cash-based transfer and flexible funding to reach those most in need. We can't allow crises like Yemen become the law, where funding shortfalls have left more than 17 million people facing acute hunger. In particular, the Republic of Korea is implementing REACH initiative, responding with emergency assistance for conflict-affected households in partnership with World Food Programme in countries such as Myanmar, Syria, Palestine, and Sudan to alleviate humanitarian crisis. This partnership is also expected to contribute to enhancing food security in those countries by providing emergency food and nutrition support. Second, enhancing coordination between the Security Council and other UN mechanisms in addressing food insecurity. In this Sahel region, we witnessed how compounding effects of conflict, climate shocks, and displacement create catastrophic conditions where extremism and terrorism can thrive. Tackling these interconnected challenges demands integrated strategies that bridge the humanitarian development peace nexus. In this context, the Peacebuilding Commission is uniquely positioned to play a catalytic role by convening a broad range of stakeholders. We propose that the PBC organize thematic sessions focused on specific countries or regions facing conflict-related food insecurity, such as Sahel, assembling relevant UN entities, regional organizations, and international financial institutions. Lastly, but not least, strengthening food system resilience. Resilient agri-food system can withstand shocks, reduce communities' vulnerability to manipulation, and prevent local disruptions from cascading into broader instability. This is why building sustainable food system must remain a core concern of this Council and the wider UN membership. In this vein, my delegation welcomes the 2025 Kampala CAADP Declaration, an ambitious roadmap for transforming Africa's agri-food system. In the same guiding spirit, the Republic of Korea proudly supports African countries in localizing and improving rice production by sharing high-yield rice varieties and agricultural technology. Mr. President, in closing, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its unwavering commitment to combating the scourge of food insecurity in communities where they matter most. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I welcome Your Excellency, President Bio, to the Council, and I thank Sierra Leone for convening this important debate. I also thank DSG Mohammed, ASG Masuya, Dr. Mayaki, and Mr. Torero for their frank and sobering briefings. Colleagues, famine in the 21st century is not a natural disaster. It is a man-made tragedy. The evidence is clear. Nearly 300 million people face acute food insecurity, most in countries affected by conflict. Across Sudan, Gaza, the Sahel, Yemen, and Myanmar, conflict has devastated harvests, shattered supply chains, and uprooted families from the land they depend on. I'll make 3 points. First, the Security Council has a responsibility to address conflict, to prevent escalation, and to support efforts towards inclusive and sustainable peace. We have the tools. Resolutions 2417 and 2573 are unequivocal. Starvation as a weapon of war and attacks on civilian infrastructure are unacceptable. We urge all member states to strengthen monitoring, reporting, and accountability for violations, and to uphold their obligations under these resolutions. Second, international humanitarian law must be upheld. The United Kingdom calls on all parties to conflict to comply fully with international humanitarian law and allow rapid, unimpeded humanitarian access. When aid is blocked or delayed, it is the most vulnerable who suffer first. Families are cut off from food, and children face acute malnutrition. In April, the UK launched the Conflict, Hunger, and International Humanitarian Law Handbook, offering practical guidance to minimize food insecurity during conflict. Third, we must act to prevent hunger wherever it occurs. Conflict breeds hunger, but hunger can also fuel instability and further conflict. The UK's Resilience and Adaptation Fund, alongside our humanitarian financing, is supporting longer-term solutions in fragile and conflict-affected states. Building local systems that protect people, markets, and livelihoods in the face of climatic and other shocks. We are investing in climate-resilient agriculture, supporting local food systems, and championing the participation of women and youth in building resilient communities. The UK remains committed to supporting food security and tackling conflict-driven hunger. We are the largest bilateral donor to the Food and Agriculture Organization, and this year alone contributed over $540 million to the World Food Programme for critical interventions, including in Palestine and Sudan. President, the UK will continue to press for sustained humanitarian access and invest in resilience so that conflict does not condemn communities to hunger. We all must use the tools at our disposal to break this cycle. I thank you.
Thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we would like to thank Sarah Lauren for organizing this open debate today. And we thank you, President Mada Bio, for chairing the meeting and thus for elevating the importance of conflict-induced hunger for global peace and security. We thank all briefers for their insight. Colleagues, serving as the informal co-focal point on conflict and hunger with Guyana, we feel we encountered acute food insecurity too many times during our tenure. For the first time ever, we faced two famines unfolding simultaneously in Gaza and in Sudan. And these are not the only crises demanding our urgent response. Attention to the looming hunger is critically needed in Yemen, South Sudan, Eastern DRC, Mali, Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, Somalia, Haiti, Afghanistan, and beyond. The interplay of climate and conflict continues unleashing the perfect storm on the already vulnerable populations. My first message today is on the need to globally enhance the respect of international humanitarian and human rights law, the clearest tool we have to prevent conflict-driven hunger. Armed conflict does not inevitably produce famine. Disrespect for international humanitarian law and this Council's resolution does. Through siege tactics, destruction of agricultural system, obstruction of aid, or attacks on markets, water systems, and transport routes, the result is predictable: starvation, disease, displacement, and the collapse of people's ability to feed themselves. When starvation as a weapon of war continues with impunity in one conflict, erosion of respect for international humanitarian law is inevitable in all the others. As a consequence, we are confronted with the largest number of starving civilians in conflicts. My second message is on the role of this Council and the tools at its disposal. Over the past year, through numerous informal briefings convened by Slovenia and Guyana with partners, one lesson has stood out clearly: knowledge shapes this Council's action. And through multiple extraordinary Council meetings requested by our delegations, we have seen that action. Even the smallest of steps saves lives. A newly opened crossing point, a temporary ceasefire that enables delivery, a humanitarian corridor negotiated in time. This Council should systematically benefit from regular reporting and early warning data. The United Nations and its partners, especially the Global Network Against Food Crisis, must continue to use this chamber to sound the alarm. The IPC reports must remain a trusted and protected source for this Council. To quote a compelling argument from our partners at the Global Coalition for Action Against Hunger in Conflict, and I quote, "If we can document it, we can predict it. If we can predict it, we can prevent it." End of quote. My final message is that famine does not end when the world's attention shifts elsewhere. Even when the headline fades, children who were suffering from stunting or wasting remain marked physically and psychologically for life. Women who experience conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence and mothers who could not feed their babies carry trauma for life. Girls or boys caught in crossfire bear scars for life. Those already at heightened risk, children, women, persons with disabilities, older persons, displaced, those facing movement restrictions, those under occupation, are disproportionately affected. This is why prevention matters. This is why compliance with international law matters. And this is why accountability matters, and this is why the action of this Council matters. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President of Sierra Leone, I should say. Welcome to New York. I'd like to thank you and congratulate Sierra Leone on your presidency of the Council, as well as for your personal efforts as the chair of the ECOWAS and the Service of Establishing Peace, in particular in West Africa. I would like to thank Sierra Leone for this debate on an essential topic for international peace and security. The speakers we heard, Madam Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General, Madam Masuya, Deputy Coordinator for Emergency Relief, Mr. Mayaki, Special Envoy of the African Union for Food Systems, and Mr. Kulin, Head Economist of the FAO, have illustrated the multiple dimensions of this topic. We heard, as we heard, the number of people suffering from hunger is increasing. Famine was confirmed in Sudan, and millions of people are suffering from hunger and malnutrition in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or in Haiti. Children and women are particularly affected with devastating consequences. This was underscored both in the short and long term. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it deliberately provoked a blockade with dramatic consequences for global food security. Considerable efforts were required to reduce the devastating effects of that blockade, in particular for developing countries and for the most vulnerable populations. Yes, it's true. Conflicts and violence are today the main cause of food insecurity. Mr. President, as the organ in charge of international food and security, as international security, this council must act. Must anticipate and act in advance. Anticipating means acting fully on the warnings transmitted by the Secretary General pursuant to Resolution 2417, or warnings that come from the Harmonized Framework IPC, and France salutes its work, or those from the Global Network Against Food Crises. Next, we must be fully mobilized to ensure the full implementation of the resolutions of this council. Humanitarian access, secure and unobstructed, must be ensured in all circumstances. The use of famine as a war is banned. Indispensable infrastructure for the survival of population, including for agriculture and food production, must be protected. Perpetrators of violation must be held accountable. Impunity is unacceptable. In Sudan, where war rages, in Gaza, where we hope the ceasefire lasts, famine has spread while dozens of tons of aid were ready to be delivered. France reiterates its strongest condemnation of the atrocities committed by the rapid support forces during and after the taking of El Fasher in Yemen. The detention by the Houthis of dozens of humanitarian workers in violation of international law has further aggravated alarming levels of food insecurity. France reiterates its strongest condemnation and its call for the immediate release of the detained personnel. Lastly, we must have a long-term vision. This council must act not only to achieve ceasefires, but also to establish a lasting peace. It must open the path after conflicts to projects, resilience projects focused on strengthening agricultural and food production systems. That is what was done for Syria. Gaza has just experienced a devastating war that subjected its population to famine. Thanks to the efforts of the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and the adoption of the Trump plan, the Declaration of New York, a glimmer of hope has appeared. France will take full part in the reconstruction of Gaza, which necessarily will require not only humanitarian assistance, but the rehabilitation of arable lands and agricultural infrastructure. Mr. President, 2025 will have been the year of sad records, with the confirmation of 2 simultaneous famines and the largest number of conflicts ever recorded. The Summit Nutrition for Growth, organized in Paris last March, made it possible to mobilize some $30 billion in favor of eradicating malnutrition of all its forms at the global level. Let's make sure that our council does its part in the service of this noble goal. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. At this juncture, I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. The flashing lights on the microphone will prompt speakers to bring their statements to a close after 3 minutes. I now give the floor to Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kazakhstan warmly welcomes you, Your Excellency, to New York, and commends Sierra Leone for convening this timely debate. We thank today's briefers for their valuable insights. The link between conflict and food insecurity has become one of the most alarming global trends of our time. Hunger is no longer solely a humanitarian challenge. It has become a major driver of instability, displacement, and repeated cycles of violence. As underlined in Resolution 2417, the deliberate destruction of food systems or the starvation of civilians constitutes a grave violation of international humanitarian law and must be addressed with unity and determination. Climate change further exacerbates these challenges. In many regions, rising temperatures, droughts, and land degradation are eroding livelihoods, fueling migration, and heightening competition over scarce natural resources. Kazakhstan firmly believes that sustainable peace is impossible without resilient food systems. We are proud to host in Astana the Islamic Organization for Food Security, a specialized institution of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that brings together 42 member states. The Organization of Food Security plays a key role in developing strategic food reserves, providing humanitarian assistance, and building agricultural capacity across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Its recent initiatives on grain security, early warning systems, and support to conflict-affected populations, including in Gaza, demonstrate how regional mechanisms can effectively complement the UN system. We encourage stronger cooperation between the Islamic Organization of Food Security, FAO, WFP, IFART, and other UN entities to enhance global resilience and ensure that no community becomes vulnerable to hunger as a consequence of conflict. Mr. President, preventing food insecurity requires more than emergency response. It demands long-term investment in climate-smart agriculture, water-efficient technologies, early warning systems, and inclusive rural development. As a major agricultural producer and reliable food supplier, Kazakhstan stands ready to expand cooperation with all partners. We remain committed to supporting global and regional efforts, promoting equitable trade, and contributing to global humanitarian assistance. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kazakhstan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Philippines congratulates Sierra Leone for convening this important debate on conflict-related food insecurity. We also thank the briefers for their valuable contributions. Mr. President, the majority of the world's food insecure live in countries ravaged by armed conflict, which disrupts food production and distribution, displaces communities, destroys critical infrastructure, and blocks humanitarian access. Conversely, food insecurity heightens tensions, deepens marginalization, and can fuel further violence. Breaking this vicious cycle requires our collective resolve and coordinated action. The Philippines emphasizes the following 3 points. First, civilians and food systems must be protected. Security Council Resolutions 2417 and 2573 stresses that the use of starvation as a method of warfare is prohibited under international humanitarian law. and parties to conflict must protect civilian infrastructure essential for survival. Second, humanitarian access should be prioritized. We call on all parties to armed conflict to uphold their obligations under international law and facilitate rapid, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian assistance. Women, children, and vulnerable populations bear the disproportionate burden of conflict-induced hunger and must be prioritized. Third, building resilient and sustainable food systems is essential for lasting peace. Rural and agricultural development, market access, livelihood diversification, and equitable resource distribution are vehicles to stability and sustainable development that address root causes of conflict. The Philippines' peace process in Mindanao demonstrates that addressing land rights, providing livelihood opportunities, and agricultural development are key components for sustainable peace agreements. Through the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in the south of the country, we work to ensure that formerly conflict-affected communities have access to agricultural support, markets, and food security programs that promote economic opportunity and activity. Nationally, the Philippines advances food security through our Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Program, climate-resilient agriculture initiatives, and social protection programs that seek to cushion vulnerable populations from food price shocks. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Philippines stands ready to work with all member states and the broader international community to help break the harmful cycle of conflict and food insecurity. We support the Security Council's continued consideration and action on this important topic. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Philippines for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, I wish to thank Sierra Leone for convening this meeting, and I thank the briefers for their valuable insights. It is Indonesia's constitutional mandate to contribute to building a world order based on freedom, peace, and social justice. This means a world free of fear, of conflict, and hunger. This is why Indonesia places high importance on food security as a key pillar for peace, stability, and prosperity. And while Indonesia has been fortunate to be blessed with enough resources to continue pursuing food security, in other parts of the world, many countries still face great challenges. Nearly 300 million people are facing acute food insecurity in conflict-affected countries and territories in 2024. This is unacceptable. We need a strong United Nations with a robust Security Council with the protection of civilians at the heart of our efforts. Against this backdrop, we wish to emphasize 3 points. First, we must reject the use of starvation as a weapon of war. We regret that there are actors involved in conflict situations who keep ignoring international humanitarian law, hence deepening the food crisis. The Security Council needs to use all available tools, including appropriate monitoring mechanisms, to strengthen prevention and accountability. Second, we must ensure sustained humanitarian assistance. The most essential step is cessation of hostilities and maintaining safe, unhindered, and unimpeded humanitarian access. Equally important is to protect all humanitarian personnel working on the ground to save lives. This also entails ensuring the protection of logistics and infrastructures that are critical to food security. We call for the international community to step up humanitarian actions to avert the widespread of hunger in conflict situations. On our part this year, Indonesia has contributed $12 million through the World Food Program to address the severe food crisis in Gaza and dispatch more than 120 tons of humanitarian aid to Myanmar. Third, we must break the vicious cycle of conflict and food insecurity. Addressing the root causes of conflict and finding a lasting solution for peace requires a holistic approach. This requires synergy between all relevant UN bodies and agencies. Furthermore, Strengthening collaboration with regional and sub-regional organizations is crucial. Indonesia welcomes regional initiatives such as those set out by the African Union and stands ready to contribute. Mr. President, the topic of our debate today clearly shows that the challenges of peace and security are multifaceted. Indonesia therefore believes that it is more important than ever to strengthen the multilateral system to address these challenges. Rest assured of Indonesia's support towards these efforts. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Indonesia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Cuba.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. Mr. President, we welcome the presence of His Excellency Mr. Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, at the opening of this meeting. We're grateful for the presentation of the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed. We express solidarity with the brethren nations of Africa, where long-standing conflicts persist, a legacy of centuries of domination and colonial exploitation that affected the development of their peoples. Many of these peoples today are suffering the consequence of this, including food insecurity. Mr. President, the report of this year on the state of food insecurity and nutrition in the world, elaborated by various UN agencies and programs, estimates that between 638 and 720 million people are suffered hunger in 2024. That is somewhere between 7.8 and 8.8% of the world's population. Prospects towards 2030 are not encouraging. Only 5 years before the deadline established for the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda, the goal of eradicating hunger remains distant and represents one of humanity's major pending duties. The General Assembly is called upon to lead global efforts to fulfill this goal, together with other specialized agencies of the UN system. At the same time, global reports assure that conflicts continue to be the main catalyst of acute food insecurity, affecting some 140 million people in 20 countries and territories. This past August, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations, UNICEF, and the World Food Program, and the WHO were reported that over 500,000 people in Gaza were caught up in famine. In spite of the negotiated ceasefire, there are still obstacles to access by Palestinians to humanitarian aid, including to food. WFP has informed that this month of November that the quantity of food in Gaza continues to be severely limited and inadequate. This is to be added to the fact that 98.5% of agricultural lands of the Gaza Strip are damaged, inaccessible, or both at the same time, which imposes significant challenges to the grave food situation. This data illustrates that hunger is being used as a powerful weapon of war against the Palestinian population. While we deliberate, millions of people in Gaza are condemned to hunger as a consequence of the actions of genocide, extermination, and ethnic cleansing carried out by Israel with impunity and with military and financial supplies ensured by the government of the United States. The Security Council must put an end to these actions in compliance of its mandate to preserve international peace and security. Mr. President, resources are abundant on the planet, but they're squandered by the major powers for their own interests, including to develop sophisticated devices to kill. What's important is to redistribute the riches in a just way. It's urgent to respond to the long-standing appeal of developing countries to establish an international order that is just, democratic, and equitable, that makes it possible to deal with the root causes of hunger and inequalities and promote sustainable development for all peoples, thus eliminating potential triggers of conflicts that affect international peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Cuba for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Eda Sampson, Deputy Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Andorra and San Marino, align themselves with this statement. Mr. President, we're off track for achieving SDG 2, zero hunger, by 2030. Acute hunger has tripled in the last decade. We see rising global needs, whilst international priorities are shifting and resources diminishing. There are many causes for acute food insecurity, but three stand out: conflict and insecurity, climate change, and economic shocks and fragility. Mr. President, for the first time since the IPC was established in 2004, two famines are unfolding simultaneously in Sudan and Gaza, while South Sudan, Haiti, Yemen, and Mali remain at risk of famine. These food and malnutrition crises are entirely man-made and preventable. Yet, humanitarian access is denied, aid workers are attacked, and civilians and food-related infrastructures are being targeted. In line with Security Council Resolution 2417, we strongly condemn the use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, as prohibited by international humanitarian law. As we have heard today, across Gaza, Sudan, South Sudan, Yemen, the DRC, Haiti, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and the Sahel, and other regions, a combination of conflict and/or climate shocks with economic instability are disrupting food systems and driving food insecurity to unprecedented levels. Humanitarian access should be ensured and respect for the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence strengthened. Regional organizations, such as the African Union and others, play a vital role in preventing and responding to these crises, and the European Union remains committed to working in close partnership with them. Mr. President, the right to adequate and nutritious food is a human right. Fighting hunger and malnutrition lies at the heart of our humanitarian work, and we will stand firm in our engagement. The EU is a member of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, and we intend to uphold relevant commitments. We are deeply concerned by the persistent violations of international humanitarian law, the shrinking of humanitarian space, and the record number of attacks against humanitarian and UN personnel in 2023 and 2024, the highest numbers in recent decades. In line with our efforts to promote respect for international humanitarian law, monitoring and reporting violations, the EU supports a pilot project with Action Against Hunger to track violations of Resolution 2417. We also contribute, through the Global Network Against Food Crisis, to regular reporting to the Security Council on conflict-driven hunger. As global funding for food crisis declines, the European Union has been and will remain a stable and reliable donor. Team Europe response to global food insecurity in our partner countries since 2022 has amounted to 18 billion euro. As to some recent debates about the impact of international measures like sanctions on global food security, let me be crystal clear. All EU actions taken in response to grave violations of international law are not only lawful, proportionate, and fully justified in protecting the principles of the UN Charter, but also in every instance carefully designed to ensure that civilians are protected, that food reaches those who need it most, and that collateral consequences for global food security, trade, or access to essential goods are avoided. On the contrary, the impact of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and its deliberate targeting of agricultural infrastructure and the obstruction of maritime routes have severely disrupted exports, driven up food and fertilizer prices, and put additional pressure on vulnerable populations worldwide. Any restrictive measures adopted by countries in response to Russia's violation of the UN Charter were thus not the cause of agricultural disruption. Mr. President, urgent action is needed. First, unimpeded, sustained, rapid, and safe access. Through humanitarian diplomacy, we must push to protect civilians, infrastructure, and aid workers. Second, we need to condemn unreservedly the persistent disrespect for international humanitarian law, the shrinking of humanitarian space, and the record number of attacks against humanitarian and UN personnel, especially local and national. The EU is committed to strengthening humanitarian diplomacy efforts to ensure respect for international humanitarian law, facilitate access, and promote accountability for violations. Third, the international community needs to support humanitarian actors deliver assistance more effectively and efficiently, while ensuring the safety and security of those providing it. We must strengthen the humanitarian development peace nexus, ensuring that life-saving assistance goes hand in hand with structural interventions that address the root causes. Mr. President, as a principal donors and partners, the EU and its member states remain invested in actively supporting an inclusive, sustainable, and truly transformative humanitarian reset. In these difficult times, we must stand in solidarity, united and determined. A hunger crisis of this magnitude and complexity demands collective, immediate, and coherent action. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Sampson for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Italy fully aligns itself with the statement just delivered by the European Union and wishes to add some further remarks in its national capacity. We thank Sierra Leone for foregrounding during its Security Council's presidency the issue of conflict-related food insecurity, a top priority for Italy. Food insecurity is both a humanitarian and development issue. We need to implement immediate actions to address the humanitarian side of food crisis, while working on short, medium, and long-term development strategies to improve food systems globally. Italy recognized the great importance of tackling the nexus between conflict and food insecurity, which has therefore been identified as a strategic priority of our foreign policy and for global peace. This is why we firmly support Security Council Resolution 2417, and we stand ready to work within the Security Council to transform the commitments the REIN laid out into robust monitoring, reporting, and accountability mechanisms. Italy remains deeply committed to addressing conflict-related food security in Africa. In this spirit, we are proud to support, among others, the populations of Eastern Sudan through a new contribution of €6.5 million in partnership with the World Food Programme. This initiative targets the most vulnerable, including children and pregnant or nursing women, providing essential nutrition and humanitarian assistance in the Gedaref and Kassala states. Moreover, Italy's Food for Gas initiative is a tangible expression of our commitment to safeguarding civilians and sustaining food systems in conflict-affected areas. Through close coordination with the World Food Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement, we have delivered over 2,000 tons of food, medical, and relief supplies to the Gaza Strip. We also continue to support Ukraine in mitigating the humanitarian impact of conflict on food security, considering that the Russian aggression has hindered food security well beyond Ukraine's borders. In this context, we support the Grain from Ukraine initiative, which assists Ukraine in its grain production and export capacity. Recently, Italy also has signed an agreement to allocate €9 million to strengthen sustainable agricultural development in the Odessa region. Moreover, we must remember that conflict and displacement continue to disrupt food systems from production, manufacturing, and marketing to consumption and the management of food loss and waste. This is why we need an integrated approach that factors in fragility, post-crisis context, vulnerability, and food insecurity as a multidimensional phenomenon, not just technical agriculture. The Rome-based agencies, FAO, IFAD, and WFP, stand at the heart of global efforts to make food systems more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive. From early warning and anticipatory action to smallholder financing and climate-smart agriculture, they are uniquely positioned to connect the humanitarian response with long-term development. Italy is proud to host and support the Rome-based agencies as global hubs for food security and nutrition. More recently, Italy co-hosted, together with Ethiopia, the UN Food Systems Summit +4 stocktake. Following the previous editions of the summit held in New York and Rome, we strongly believed in the importance of holding this second stocktake moment in Africa, which is one of the continents most affected by conflicts. Today, let us reiterate our collective commitment to confront food insecurity with urgency, determination, innovation, and solidarity. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Italy for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Chile.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. We're grateful to Sierra Leone for convening this debate and for the comprehensive approach that proposes regarding the relation between hunger and conflict. We're also grateful to Madam Amina Mohammed, Madam Joyce Masuya, Mr. Maximo Torero, Mr. Ibrahim Hassane. For Chile, hunger cannot be a weapon of war. It's deliberate use against civilians with exacerbated impact against women and children is a grave violation of international humanitarian law, human rights, international criminal law, contrary to the fundamental principles of this organization. The Council must ensure the full implementation of Resolution 2417, demand accountability, and strengthen mechanisms of monitoring and early warning that prevent famine in contexts of conflict. No political difference can justify the use of hunger as an instrument of coercion. The reality on the ground is clear in situations such as Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, Haiti, DRC. Conflicts continue to deliberately disrupt food production systems, destroying livelihoods and forcing the displacement of entire communities, affecting women, children, and older adults. In the face of these challenges, we must promote strict respect for international law, protecting critical infrastructure, ensuring unhindered humanitarian access, promoting cooperation between UN agencies, local governments, regional organizations, and civil society. With this in mind, Chile values the initiatives of the African Union and its strategies to link agricultural production with community resilience and peace building. At the same time, it's essential to acknowledge that food insecurity can become a factor that aggravates instability and prolongs cycles of violence. Breaking this cycle of violence requires strengthening policies of prevention and sustainable development. Mr. President, humanitarian access demands real political commitment. The Council must ensure that international humanitarian law is upheld and that the assistance reaches those who need it without delays. Likewise, the full implementation of humanitarian exemptions is fundamental to avoid personnel and supplies being stuck because of administrative procedures. Humanitarian agencies require security, predictability of financial resources that requires accelerating granting permits of access and protecting humanitarian infrastructure. The response to food insecurity also requires innovation and cooperation. Chile promotes sustainable and climate-resilient agriculture as well as policies of water management that strengthen food security. In situation of conflicts, these measures must be accompanied by the protection of essential infrastructure for the production and distribution of food to reduce vulnerability of communities and avoid the deterioration of livelihoods that becomes a factor of instability. As the President of Chile recalled last October during a statement in the FAO, ending hunger is the minimum common denominator of civilization that requires strengthening multilateralism, international cooperation, and sustainable transformation of food systems. Lastly, Mr. President, ensuring humanitarian access, cooperating with civilian population, reducing factors that aggravate vulnerability of communities are responsibilities that cannot be shifted or postponed. Chile reaffirms its conviction that if we act coherently, with a sense of responsibility, we can contribute in an effective way to alleviate the human suffering and sustain collective efforts for a lasting peace. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Chile for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Sierra Leone for this timely initiative and the briefers for their valuable insights. This session takes place at a time when the international community is still reeling from the harrowing images of induced hunger in the Gaza Strip, as well as unprecedented scale of the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and elsewhere on the African continent, among others. The security landscape in Africa is also characterized by the persistence of conventional security threats, including intrastate conflicts, such as insurgencies and conflicts involving terrorist groups. Challenges related to governance and corruption have resulted in poverty, underdevelopment, inequality, political and economic marginalization, and terrorism, compounded by climate change leading to mass displacement. The ongoing scramble for rare mineral resources is another area of concern involving states and non-state actors, such as transnational crime syndicates, which are leveraging new technologies in the fight for these resources, resulting in violent conflicts. Conflict limits access to food in various ways, while also disrupting the flow of food and humanitarian aid, thereby driving acute hunger. It further causes widespread displacement, and starvation is also used as a weapon of war. Infrastructure is damaged or destroyed during conflict, making it harder to plant, harvest, and transport food. Landmines and other remnants of war frequently leave farmland too dangerous to cultivate, thereby deepening hunger. Conflict also leads to food insecurity, which in turn further increases the chances of unrest and violence. While it is challenging to address food insecurity during ongoing conflict, various mechanisms, including the regional and at the sub-regional level, should be employed to diffuse tensions, mediate, and build and sustain peace. The good offices of the Secretary General need to be utilized to negotiate safe passage or corridors for humanitarian aid, a feat which is always challenging at the best of times, especially where civilian infrastructure has been damaged. However, community structures, mostly led by women involved in building peace at the local level, have proven to be instrumental in reaching vulnerable communities. Building partnerships with civil society and the private sector has led to the development of innovative solutions to access the most vulnerable sectors of the population. Youth have also leveraged new technologies to reach far-flung and isolated areas. Women's networks have further been instrumental, especially in building resilience to hunger through community-based projects with the support of governments in the absence of social security nets. They have proven to be resourceful in also documenting human rights violations and abuses that could ensure accountabilities in countries emerging from conflict. Working in a coherent manner, the United Nations agencies and programs have been critical partners given their expertise to raise alarm and also document human rights violations, including violations of international humanitarian law. Leveraging technology, Mr. President, including space technology for agricultural purposes is also important, such as predicting extreme weather conditions which impact the production of food. The need for humanitarian strategies to deal with disaster as part of national development plans play a key role. Finally, Mr. President, there's a need to build food systems that are adaptive, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient, diversifying and increasing the reliability of food sources, which necessitate integrating planning and adaptation in agricultural strategies. In this regard, we commend the latest iteration of the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program and the action plan, the Kampala Strategy and Action Plan 2026 to 2025, aimed at eliminating hunger and reducing poverty through economic growth and agricultural development. I thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of Spain.
Mr. President, Spain aligns itself with a statement of the Group of Friends of Action on Hunger and Conflict and would like to share some comments on our national capacity. The global situation of hunger is extremely alarming. According to the World Food Program, 70% of people who suffer acute food insecurity live in countries that have been fragilized or in conflict. This destruction of crops, disruption of markets, and displacement worsen a global crisis in places like Palestine and Sudan. In Gaza, there's a food disaster due to the destruction of infrastructure limits and access to humanitarian access. In Sudan, the recent taking of El Fasher has led the United Nations to declare a famine for the second time. And on the West Bank, the level of violence against farmers has reached unprecedented levels, while other crises are affecting the Middle East, Sahel, Latin America, and the Caribbean, especially Haiti and Colombia. International humanitarian law is clear. The use of hunger as a method of war is banned, as acknowledged in Resolution 2417 of this Council. Attacks against essential infrastructure, such as crops, as well as the blockading humanitarian aid, has a devastating impact on food security. Spain would like to express its profound concern regarding the devastating link between armed conflicts and hunger. The Spanish strategy of humanitarian diplomacy addresses this scourge as one of its priority areas, and we're using our humanitarian diplomacy and international cooperation to fight against this. We demand full respect for international humanitarian law, allowing unrestricted access of humanitarian assistance in all contexts. We also demand accountability for violations of international humanitarian law. In the face of the increasing map of hunger around the world and the crisis of humanitarian financing, Spain has strengthened its humanitarian response through our Agency of Cooperation and Development. We've tripled our budget for humanitarian assistance in 5 years, in line with our law on sustainable development and global solidarity that establishes a goal of 0.7% of GDP in terms of ODA by 2030, including 10% of that figure for humanitarian aid. Our main humanitarian partner in the fight against food insecurity is the World Food Program. In 2025, we've disbursed some 16 million euros in voluntary contributions, including a contribution of 1.5 million euros to the logistical center of Las Palmas and the Canarias, which is key for operations in the Sahel and Western Africa. We also are cooperating with UNICEF, the Red Cross, and various Spanish NGOs in places like Haiti, Burkina Faso, the DRC, and Mali. Our commitment takes the form of concrete actions of multilateral cooperation, such as the support for the Regional Food Security Reserve of ECOWAS in Western Africa, which is a project that strengthens national and regional capacities to respond in the face of food crises through local, national, and regional reserves of food, thus complementing efforts of member states. Mr. President, to conclude, to combat hunger and armed conflicts, we reaffirm our commitment to the defense of international humanitarian law, accountability, and multilateral actions. It's not only an issue of saving lives, but also protecting peace and human dignity. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Spain for the statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m.
We need to move faster and move together. And this COP must ignite a decade of acceleration and delivery.
Muita gente não acreditava que fôssemos possíveis trazer para o estado do Amazonas uma COP. E nós queríamos que a pessoa viesse aqui para ver o que é a Amazônia.
The United Nations will not give up on the 1.5 degrees goal. Because another truth is evident. We have never been better equipped to fight back. A clean energy revolution has taken hold. Solar and wind are now the cheapest sources of power and the fastest growing sources of electricity in history. What is still missing is political courage. Let us be clear, the 1.5 degrees limit is a red line for humanity. It must be kept within reach. And scientists also tell us that this is still possible. If we act now at speed and scale, we can make the overshoot as small, as short, and as safe as possible, and bring temperatures back below 1.5 degrees Celsius before century's end.
This is not the story of an institution. It's the story of people. People who stood between war and peace, and chose peace. People who said, dignity cannot be broken. People who carried food on their backs, who rebuilt schools, who gave shelter to strangers. People who stood for the earth before it was too late. And the people who will carry it forward. The young, the unheard, the unstoppable. For 80 years, this has been and will be the work of humanity. Not perfect, not finished, but always better together. 80 years and more for peace, human rights, and sustainable development. UN. Better together.
This exhibition is to mark the UN's 80th anniversary, 80 years of actually having an incredible impact on the world. Some of the pictures depict very surprising ways that most people don't know that the UN has impacted the world, like telecommunications regulations or the UN postal system. A lot of the UN agencies are represented, but it's not about the UN, it's about the people who have benefited from the UN.
The people in these images are not simply posing for a photo. They are posing a question: what else is possible if the world put more effort into forging shared solutions? Raging conflicts, deepening inequality, runaway technologies, and a burning planet, none of these will fix themselves, and no one nation can fix them alone. We must work together, recognizing our shared humanity and building our shared future.
What's unique about this exhibit is we have 24 of the 200 photos exhibited here at UN headquarters. The UN information centers around the world are going to be printing images for exhibits to mark the 80th anniversary of the UN wherever they are. So it really is a global exhibit.
Over 17 million people, or nearly half of Yemen's population, are estimated to be acutely hungry. Malnutrition remains a scourge across the country, affecting 1.3 million pregnant and breastfeeding women and 2.3 million children under the age of 5. Without sustained humanitarian support, an estimated 6 million more people could end up in emergency levels of food insecurity. Despite an operating environment beset by multiple risks and serious challenges, humanitarian operations continue to forge ahead and humanitarians remain committed and engaged.
Peace in Yemen is so much more than the containment of a threat.
It is first and foremost about the Yemenis. It is a country where there are incredible opportunities, a long and rich history, and lives full of promises. I want to again thank this Council for its unified and highly valued support, even when the overall situation remains so challenging to realize this potential for Yemen.
Plastic impacts oceans. 18 to 20% of all plastic waste is ending up in the oceans. Plastics has a huge impact on ocean health, on economy. Tourism is impacted. It means that fisher folk living on coastal areas are impacted, and also beach cleanup. Beach cleanup costs a lot. And what are we doing here at the UN Oceans Conference? There is great celebration for the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction treaty, and now the focus is turning to the plastics treaty. The scale and urgency of the plastic pollution crisis highlights the need for continued, bold, coordinated, and collective action. There is hope that it will conclude, the agreement will conclude in Geneva this year in August.
We've seen a real momentum in terms of commitment to dealing with the problems that the oceans are facing. There's a real recognition that we have a crisis facing the ocean, but also that there's a toolbox out there to do something about that. For me as legal counsel, I've been particularly following the issue of the BBNJ agreement. That is going to provide support to conservation of marine biodiversity in areas that are not within individual states' jurisdiction. These are huge areas. Finding ways for states to cooperate to protect marine biodiversity in these huge areas of the ocean is a major step forward. What the UN family does is supporting states in actually doing this. So capacity building, support in taking these conventions and making them a reality at the national or regional level. So we're heading down the final stretch towards that treaty entering into force, and that is a real contribution to the legal protection of the oceans ahead.
My name is Fabien Cousteau, third-generation ocean explorer, aquanaut, and voice for the ocean. The longest I've been underwater is a full 31 days in saturation to explore the ocean world. Mission called Mission 31, where we did 3 years worth of scientific experiments in those 31 days because of that unprecedented access to this magical underwater universe. We've seen a great number of changes that are exponentially accelerating in the negative direction. Unfortunately, we have precious little time, and we've wasted many decades in the discussion process. It's now time to implement solutions. As perfect or isn't perfect as they are, today is the day that we take the next step forward in protecting and restoring our ocean planet.
Сүүлийн 2 жилүүд маш их засцууд их орсон. Тэр өвлүүд ер нь зарим айлууд бол ер нь маш их малаа алдсан. Манай хувьд бол нэлийн багахан, ер нь бол хорогдол багтай.
Thank you. Thank you. I've just found out that normally they don't release the livestock out of the stockade until the temperature comes up and gets a little bit warmer, and then they'll move them from the stockade up to the greener parts of the pasture land, so they manage the pasture land as well. Very skilled, you know, very skilled.
One of the things that we're gonna do is to put up like collection centers where, you know, in a certain locality, the herders would come into that place, and there's going to be a center for aggregators.
given that these people have been herding livestock for thousands of years in this landscape, their willingness to learn, to relearn, to adapt, and to find new ways of making sure that their culture and their future is as secure as they can make it, because that is to the benefit of us all as a global community. The diversity of people of our world is enormously important.
It is really important for us to come to the UN Ocean Conference because we are small islands but large ocean states, and we are bringing our perspectives, our stories to this global conversation.
Conferences like this are important for making things happen because we bring together people who have been talking about ideas, but they actually come together and have time to spend together to work out the details.
We are already seeing sea level rise and warming oceans and ocean acidification, extreme weather events. They're all the result of a heating ocean, which is caused principally by greenhouse gas emissions.
We are ocean people, and that is why ocean is just so important to us.
Our capacity to actually sustainably manage this area as we have for thousands of years is being threatened, particularly by climate change. So we need assistance. We're inviting partners to come and join us to ensure that this sustainable management can continue for the future generations as well.
Today we are releasing a report that for the first time has information on the sustainability of 2,570 fish stocks around the world. And the main result of the report is that 35.5% of the fisheries out there are unsustainably exploited. That means that out of 100 fish stocks, all treated equally, 35 of them are overexploited, and there are very different patterns that we see in different regions. In Canada, the US, the Pacific side, more than 90% of the stocks have been sustainably exploited. In the Antarctic region, 100% of the stocks are sustainably exploited. So those are the positive. There are some negatives. For example, the northwest African coast down to the Gulf of Guinea, more than 50% of the stocks are overfished. And this is a trend that has been deteriorating over time. The Mediterranean and the Black Sea also in a difficult situation. 65% of the stocks in this sea are overexploited. The main lesson of the report first is that management works. It has to be effective management, but it works. And it is important to recognize this because we know how to rebuild populations.
There's not one of us who isn't affected by new changes in data, artificial intelligence, digital transformation, innovations, foresight, and behavioral science. They are shaping all of our lives, and that is why UN 2.0 Week matters to all of us. UN 2.0 is a series of the most important facets of our people. You and I, all part of the United Nations and part of the multilateral system. It's around how to harness innovation and digital transformation to all together transform the United Nations into a body that serves better than we ever have before. There is a rich series of panels and discussions, and you can register at the link below and join any one of those sessions. The entire UN 2.0 agenda matters more today than it ever has.
Poi lavan tavolo usir. E tava pescava na beira mar, me acompanhava ele. Que logo amanhã ser. Peixe estava na cardum. Cala que era 7 horas, 8 horas, 9 horas, já está quantidade de peixe na terra. Normalmente ele vai estar 12 reais, 13 reais na porto por dia para morrer uma quantidade de peixe enorme. Mas gosto nem mais para longe, que está aqui quando mais será a beira de porto. Ganha aqui 3 peixes ali de rasta bote, às vezes vem mais. Hoje a pesca foi normal.
The blue economy has its focus not only on the economic development of the country and the fishing sector, but also focus on the economic development and the livelihoods of the population. So it's a more integrated, more inclusive, and a more sustainable approach. It's good to have joint work because we have specific technical capacities in several areas, so it's good to have those synergies.
No assunto de embarcação que está parado, alguns é falta de isca. Para morrer esta época que está apanhado demasiadamente, fica estragado mais tarde, não está bem mesmo, que está tempo para morrer, que está respeitado. Mas também tem muito que está parado, que é falta de motor. Tem alguns que estão a mar a remo. Então, aquele que está a mar a remo, aquele que está pisca perto de Caraca, é que não rendimento, principalmente para quem é chefe de família. Então, a nós que lá é coisa disposto, quem está presidente da associação, já não entra com pedido no Ministério de Mar, prometendo que ele proposta de 50%, mesmo apoiando nós com o motor. Então, se vocês não apoiar com o motor, tudo quem é chefe de família tem que viver vida normal.
There is a cooperative that has a boat that has been rehabilitated with the funds of the project and led by Unido.
Desde 2013, quando eu criei aquela associação, foi no intuito de arrecadar peixe para abastecer a cantina escolar. Professores falando, alunos que se prestam atenção na sala para morrer e alimentação que seja suficiente.
Não está põe na arroz, não está põe na sopa, não está põe na pinto. E sempre não está faz aquela questão de ter uma boa alimentação para a criança da escola.
Nunca está hoje a solicitação, não. A nós desde já que não está conseguindo um barco de maior porte, quer dizer que não está pensa abastecer a cantina escolar quando tem incidente e depois para não submeter a outro polo.
This is a bigger boat, so it will allow the fishermen to go a little bit further because there is a limitation for artisanal fishing. They cannot go more than 3 miles offshore. This will allow them to go a little bit further, stay a little bit of time also in the sea, which will improve their capture. At the moment we have 50 business plans, that's 90% of them are women-led, and now we are supporting them how to connect with the investments, opportunities and fundings that are available.
Ele recolhe nome para formação para pescadores sobre conserva de pescado a bordo, para ficar prático, com experiência para fazer qualquer coisa de bem-estar. E também para pescadores na formação de guia turista.
People like Maria are very important for the program because she was already empowered, but she showed with the training and all the support that we have given, she has embraced more challenges. So now she is thinking bigger and she can be the example for others.
Podemos para o quem está a formação, quem está a reunião, quem está a fazer tudo por tudo, também está para a comunidade também, para ter uma mulher ativa, assim, mas não de quem vai, para ficar missão de comunidade. Que nós é chefe de família para não arranjar coisa de buscar pão para nosso filho.
Freixo Agostinho veio para mostrar que é possível comer bem, comer saudável, com qualidade e segurança. Tem uma parte do pescado que não é necessário ter algum tipo de tratamento, vai para as cadeias hoteleiras. A outra parte do pescado que vem para a cidade da praia, vem aqui na fábrica e nós transformamos. Existem algumas espécies que têm estado sob pressão. Na Agostinho escolhemos produzir tudo o que o mar nos dá. Através de filete sem pele, a espécie toda bonitinha, o cliente já consome essa espécie e é isto que nos dá gosto. Nós é que temos que adaptar à natureza e não o contrário.
The scenes or landscape in the battlefields are dramatically changing. If you look at the news from Ukraine or in the Middle East, I mean, you hear very often about UAVs or armed drones. It has basically become a weapon of choice. The most common ones are UAVs, uncrewed aerial vehicles. And they come in different shapes, sizes, and forms. The small ones, very simple ones that you can basically pick up from your local toy shop, to very sophisticated UAVs that are developed and produced for military purposes. And that is a dramatic sort of changes in the way in which the war and conflicts are fought.
The nature of warfare for the major powers who have been investing in weapon systems has been increasingly remote, right? Greater distance from the battlefield, but still with human control over the identification, the selection, and the firing on targets. If those functions are no longer ones that are undertaken by humans, but are undertaken by machines, it raises a whole host of questions, not least are the current laws of war fit for purpose, because they were written for humans and not for machines.
The development of technologies like autonomous weapon systems will make it very easy for people to go to war. These systems, once activated, have the ability to go and search, select, target an individual. These systems can be able to make decisions about who lives or die without any further human intervention or control. You can end up not being able, number one, to tell who deployed these systems to begin with. Even if you knew where they were coming from, we may end up with a crime. We may end up with a wrongful act that has been done, but with no soul to blame. Where you could say, who did this to me? And someone will say, actually, no one did. It was the machine.
When autonomy means that once you actually switch it on, then the machines actually are fully delegated with the decision-making power to target and trigger the lethal force and use the lethal force, then it gets really in a blurring, a very difficult area of who is accountable, who is responsible.
I think our experience of technology is that it's imperfect and that it makes mistakes, and we're willing to, tolerate that in the civilian world of our daily lives. But when it comes to the battlefield, a mistake can mean life or death, and it's very easy for machines to mistake targets. We're very concerned about autonomous weapon systems targeting people and using sensor technology to do that. The AI is still flawed, and yet we're starting to incorporate it into weapon systems, and to incorporate it now when it's still not functioning properly and when it brings with it the biases of the people who were programming those systems, it could end up with disastrous results for humanity.
Machines making a decision to take human life is just simply morally repugnant, and it should not be allowed. It should be, in fact, banned by international law. That's the United Nations position. So autonomy, especially attached to UAVs, is a really source of concern.
In terms of international humanitarian law, you are only authorized to target and kill people who are directly participating in hostilities or who are members of a certain state armed force. And I would say you can precisely target a wrong target. So the question is, can these systems be able to lawfully identify legitimate targets?
In a conflict area where things are rapidly changing, where it's completely unpredictable, I doubt that a machine would be able to make the decisions needed to spare civilians, and that they could actually really also make a legal analysis of who is a combatant and who is a civilian in a very short time frame.
When it comes to use of force, especially lethal force, the international law framework is based on the human accountability. So you can't hold the machines or the AI or algorithms accountable. We do have the existing international humanitarian law, and those humanitarian law doesn't apply to just specific categories of weapons. Whatever the weapon systems that you're using, the number one rule is to protect civilians, non-combatants. And this is something that we absolutely have to maintain, but also, I would say, strengthen. We need to make sure that it will be fully implemented.
We think that explicit new international rules are needed to tackle autonomous weapon systems and to give the world a home or a framework for dealing with the problems which are going to be raised in the years to come. Currently, there is no international framework to deal with autonomous weapon systems, and one is urgently needed, and not just in the next couple of decades, but the next couple of years.
Left unregulated, uncontrolled, then I'm sure it will become an existential question. We are still at the beginning of the AI use in weapon systems, and that's why the discussions and negotiations really require urgency. Before these things actually become the weapon of choice, fully autonomous weapons, no human oversight, no human accountability, we need to make sure that we prevent that sort of a quite unpredictable impact on human race.
Having obtained the required 2/3 majority and the largest number of votes, Bahrain, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Latvia, and Liberia are elected members of the Security Council for a 2-year term beginning on January 1st, 2026.
Welcome to the SDG Media Zone. We are about to start our next session. I'm going to hand it over to the moderator, Reedy Klabi, international broadcaster and journalist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me for this very important conversation, global cooperation on AI for the benefit of humanity. It feels like a continuation of a conversation I was a part of last year at the Summit of the Future, and we're talking about AI for humanity. It was very, very clear that we need to move with urgency, that there were certain themes that were underpinning that conversation: collaborative partnerships, inclusive AI, making sure that no one is left behind. And I was quite inspired by some of the examples that were showcased on stage around how AI was resulting in positive health outcomes, positive education outcomes, and it was really inspirational. Now, fast forward 12 months later, it is good to be here again to really focus the conversation on the governance mechanisms for AI. And the United Nations, of course, have come up with governance tools that the Secretary General has called a breathtaking milestone, I think. This is the Global Dialogue on AI Governance, as well as the International Independent Panel of Scientists on AI. It's good to welcome you then, Mr. Amandeep Singh Gill, Under Secretary General and Special Envoy for Digital and Emerging Technologies. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So we know that AI is very central to the Global Digital Compact. We know that. But it would be wonderful to know, in the last 12 months, how have we moved forward?
Like you were saying, we've had these conversations for a while, so we've now moved from conversations to concrete mechanisms. 1 year after the adoption of the Global Digital Compact, in which these decisions were taken on governing AI for humanity, we have now institutionalized these mechanisms, namely the Global Dialogue on AI Governance and an independent international scientific panel on AI. So this is why the Secretary General has called it a milestone and breathtaking, because the technology is moving fast, but we're also trying to keep pace with technology through these agile governance mechanisms that can be built on, that can be adjusted as we see the full scope and impact of this powerful technology.
I want to talk a little bit then about the data. One of the challenges is always around striking a balance between the transformative potential of AI and risk, societal risk, but also when the data tells us something, how do we then transition from that point into the policy framework? How do these governance mechanisms help us do that?
Right. So if you look at the scientific panel, it would be, in a way, as the Secretary General put it, an evidence engine for policy. So these 40 eminent scientists and the call for nominating candidates to this group of 40 eminent scientists was launched yesterday. So they'll pool evidence from around the world on data, on what is working and what is not working. What are the opportunities? What are the risks? What are the direction that this technology is taking? And based on that data, they'll produce an annual report and regular thematic assessments, which would help policymakers to take the right decisions. So this will allow policy to proceed on the basis of science, data, and evidence. And secondly, and very importantly, it'll bridge the information gap between some countries who know a lot more about AI and many others who are still struggling to grasp the full impact.
So as somebody who comes from the global south and lives in the global north, you have touched on something that I'm very passionate about: the gaps between one country and the other in terms of access, in terms of skills, and also just some cultural barriers in some countries on AI. And it's not even cultural barriers from an African perspective or global south perspective. Even here in the United States, there's deep contestation around AI. Where do you use it? What are the parameters? What are the boundaries? And so on. So it looks like you've got your work cut out for you when it comes to the unique dynamics between different countries.
And that's the value we bring at the United Nations. The diversity of the world, different voices, 193 member states coming together regularly in different forums, whether on gender, environment, climate action. So this power of convening can be leveraged to help us build AI for humanity. Very concretely, in line with these two mechanisms, the Secretary General has proposed some innovative financing options for AI capacity building. Capacity for regulation or governance, capacity for building data sets in your own language, in your own context. a bare minimum of infrastructure for training AI models, running data centers, and of course the talent that's needed, especially the cross-domain talent, agriculture and computer science, health and AI, that will assist us in driving progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. A key component of this report is a suggestion for a global fund on AI of $1 to $3 billion for urgent investments in building a minimum national capacity on AI in 90 to 100 countries that are most at risk of getting left behind.
Let's just stay with that for just a moment, because part of what the UN Secretary General has challenged the Global Compact on is finding innovative financing to capacitate exactly this particular project, these particular projects, and also keeping in mind the geopolitical turbulence that has also had an impact on financing mechanisms and so on. How are you insulating your work, as it were, against these unpredictable geopolitical shocks, but also the urgency of building capacity?
Right. So, yes, the challenges are real. The geopolitical competition, the struggle for resources and financing for multilateral work. But if we find the right partnerships, and partnerships are a key theme in the Sustainable Development Goals, then we can leverage those partnerships to deliver more value for member states. We've been fortunate in this domain of digital and emerging technologies to find partners in civil society, philanthropic organizations, the private sector, independent scientists, who have helped amplify this work, brought in ideas and insights, and enriched the policy discussions and assisted member states to move forward with some of these complex decisions and mechanisms. So we'll continue to do more of that, and hopefully work in an agile, networked fashion so that our, let's say, as it's called in the corporate world, our overheads are low.
And then I want to get onto another aspect of education. You know, also that the inequality when it comes to the quality of education, access to education. How do we adapt, especially at that very rudimentary and basic level, to the demands of AI so that we produce the skills even at that level? I would imagine that over time, cumulatively, it would make your work easier when member states and countries already in their culture, in their practice, in their curriculums, this is the language that they speak. And I want to add to that it's not just education for education's sake. It's education that is attuned to our global priorities, the SDGs, to make them mainstream. And the best way to do that is already at that elementary level.
You've touched on a most important question. And we spoke about talent earlier, cross-domain talent. But I think we have to even go further down into schools. And at the high-level meeting which launched these dialogues yesterday, the Slovak Minister for Education and Research was saying that there is an asymmetry. 8 out of 10 children in schools in Slovakia use AI, whereas only 4 out of 10 teachers use it. So the teachers don't have the capacity to engage their students on how best to use AI. So we need to build those skills, society-wide skills, on uptake of AI, the wise, responsible use of AI tools, so among children and students, but also teachers, parents, educators, and then in the industry, because occupations are going to shift. AI is going to impact existing jobs, what kind of skills go into specific occupations, and therefore the vocational training systems, the university education system has to be adjusted in many areas. And this requires an agile approach to education. And I hope that what the Secretary General has proposed in terms of these options for capacity building, a significant portion of those efforts is dedicated to education, to literacy, preparing our youth for the jobs of the future.
Going back to governance, and I'm not in any way suggesting that your office should be policing and cracking the whip on member states and partners, but governance speaks to that there's got to be a common set of values, a common set of rules, and some level of compliance with the governance system. And I know that in multiple agencies of the United Nations, there are challenges with compliance for a variety of reasons. How are you responding to that particular challenge, given that you would have to advance the commitments that are made in order for us to realize the global cooperation on AI?
I think we don't have the stick to police compliance, except in a few narrow areas that are related to international peace and security. However, we have the power of persuasion, we have the convening power, and we have the engagement power with civil society, other actors on the ground that can then bring their own persuasive power into play. So the Secretary General and I are committed to using whatever tools that are at our disposal to help member states to make progress on their commitments under the Global Digital Compact. Earlier this week on Monday, we had the Digital Cooperation Day to celebrate 1 year of the GDC, look back at the achievements and plan ahead, and there we launched a portal. We are going to be working on that portal with member states, partners from across the UN, and others to put data. You'd mentioned the power of data. So if we can put data on progress transparently out there, it allows us to keep everyone honest and accountable, but also to look for the right partnerships in specific areas of follow-up to the GDC.
And the tools for measuring progress, what can you tell us about that?
So one is this broad portal where data on different aspects from connectivity, bridging the digital divide, to safety and trust online can be put there. And then there are other very, very important issues that we are working on. If you look at digital public infrastructure, for example, we put in place a safeguards framework that allows governments and other stakeholders to measure how inclusive, safe, and empowering their digital public infrastructure is, how human rights respecting it is, to learn from experience of different countries across the globe. Likewise, in the case of artificial intelligence, with the scientific panel, with the evidence coming in, it'll again help us track progress on how we are doing AI for good, AI for humanity. So there are ways in which we can leverage insights, data, evidence, partnerships to hold everyone accountable and honest.
So if you and I were speaking a couple of years ago, I would have been very skeptical. Last year, as I said, I was inspired, and now I kind of get it. The penny has dropped. I understand what it's all about, because we always kind of, in conversations, put a binary between AI and human rights, as though the two are opposed to each other. And last year, I remember the big theme was around human-centered AI, and you've just said that. But I do want to get a little bit more on how the UN in particular is embedding human rights principles into AI deployment, especially around issues of privacy in countries also where you don't have sophisticated democratic systems, and it's not just in Africa. I won't mention where else is happening in the global north. But just a comment on embedding then. Talking of human-centered AI, how are you specifically embedding human rights into the governance?
So in the Global Digital Compact, from which this is springing, human rights are a key consideration. So they are, in my view, one of the three pillars of the Global Digital Compact: human rights, sustainable development, and multi-stakeholder collaborative, cooperative approaches. So in all sections of the GDC, including in one of the 5 objective areas, human rights are front and center. In the case of artificial intelligence, the work of the high-level advisory body on AI of the Secretary General centered human rights in its approach. When it looked at AI risks, for example, it looked at them from the perspective of vulnerability, not in a never-ending list of risks that we keep adjusting over time, but who is the most vulnerable? And then when it looked at AI capacity, it did not look at it from the aspect of tech solutionism, but from the aspect of empowerment. So keeping with the spirit of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So as we move forward, I'm sure the dialogue will hear perspectives from around the world where human rights, human dignity is being advanced, also by leveraging AI. And when leveraging AI, we are making sure that human dignity, human rights are not compromised.
What are you most excited about? I mean, you are working across UN agencies and institutions. You are working across sectors. You've got the private sector, civil society. When you are sitting in these rooms and these convenings, what is it that you look at and say, I'm excited about this, and this is what it's going to look like in the next couple of years?
Thank you. So what motivates me, excites me most is the institutional evolution of our multilateral institutions, multilateral mechanisms. And AI, in a sense, is a touchstone, is a test case for multilateralism that's fit for purpose, fit for the future. So what we've been able to achieve, following the vision of the Secretary General, the guidance of the member states in this area, gives me a lot of hope for the UN, a lot of hope for multilateralism, and ensuring that everyone, everywhere can come together to address global challenges.
And it's not something that happens at UNGA. I mean, I'm just thinking about other convenings like your G7, G20, we've got COP30 coming up as well. So at all these convenings, it looks as if there is, we are coalescing around the same values, the same urgency of AI for the benefit of humanity.
Absolutely. Those forums are very valuable. They complement the UN. They cannot replace the UN's inclusive setting. Tonight I'm heading to South Africa to participate in the G20 meeting on the subject of the digital economy. And it's the first time that Africa is hosting the G20, and there's a big focus through a task force on AI, data for development, and the inclusive digital economy on all these areas. And what we do at the UN resonates there, and what these forums do resonates at the UN. So this is a mutually beneficial relationship as we take the world forward on governing AI for humanity.
Well, it was such a joy to speak to you again, to be initiated with the advancement, the commitments, and to also emphasize the importance of a governance for AI as we make it beneficial for humanity. Thank you so very much for talking to me today. And travel safely to South Africa. You saw that I had a big smile when you said you're traveling to South Africa because that's where I'm from. So say hi to everybody there.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Secretary and the Special Envoy on Digital and Emerging Technologies, Amandeep Singh Gill. Thank you.